Mhm. So I have a different list of folks for those who had reserved. So I'm going to just kick it to the administration, and if you could just introduce everybody. Okay. All right, then let's get started.
Great. Thank you very much.
Good morning, or excuse me, good afternoon. My name is Lydia Edwards. I'm chair of the Committee on Housing and Development. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order modifying open meeting laws, we are having this hearing on Zoom. This allows the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health recommendations. This hearing today is on dockets 0452 through 0456 and also 0472. And I'll go through each one of those very briefly and then turn it over to the administration. This is a public hearing and it can be recorded and live streamed on www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be also rebroadcast at a later date on Xfinity 8, RCN82, and Fios 964. Anyone that would like to testify on this matter, please email juan.lopez, that's juan.lopez, at boston.gov for the Zoom link. Again, today's hearing is on several dockets. Docket 0453 is for $17 million, a CDBG grant. Docket 0454 is for a little over close to $6 million, and that is a HUD grant to be described a little bit later. 0455 is a $3.2 million grant for housing with persons with AIDS, and 0456 is a grant for $1.4 million, and it is with regards to emergency solutions grants or ESG grants for HUD. And 0472 is a grant for $38 million, and these funds will be used to support programs of services and housing to the homeless. Again, I am going to turn this shortly over to the administration. Just wanted to introduce my colleagues who are here today. We have Councillor Flynn from District 2, Councillor Julie Mejia, who is at large, and Councillor Bach from District 8. Have I gotten all of the councillors so far? Okay, so I'm going to turn this now over to Tim Davis from DND, who will introduce all the members of the administration who are here to discuss the grants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards, and I want to thank you for scheduling this hearing so expeditiously. For the record, I am Tim Davis, Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research at the Department of Neighborhood Development. Joining me for remarks today are Lila Bernstein, head of DND's Supportive Housing Division, Trinh Nguyen, Director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, and Natalie Erdebe, Director of the Small Business Office at the Office of Economic Development. Also with us today for questions, we have Jessica Boatwright, a Deputy Director at DND for Neighborhood Housing, Maureen Flynn, Deputy Director for the Boston Home Center, Rick Wilson, Deputy Director for ANF, Katie Ford, Acting Deputy Director for Office of Housing Stability, and Jim Green, who also works with our homelessness programs. So we have, and Lila, of course, I've already mentioned. So we have a full team here from the Department of Neighborhood Development for any questions, and I will proceed from there. These orders authorize DND on behalf of the city to apply for and accept and expend the federal fiscal year 2021 funding for our HUD formula and continuum of care grants. The federal fiscal year 2021 is for us, the City of Boston fiscal year 22, starting in July. These important funds allow DND to continue to carry out a wide range of housing, homelessness, and community development programs across every neighborhood of the City of Boston. I will speak briefly about our annual allocations for the city's 2022 fiscal year, which begins on July 1, providing highlights from the fact sheets that you have before you. I will speak about our annual allocations first. Boston will receive about $28.1 million from HUD for these annual allocations. The overall funding is about $215,000 more than last year's total of $27.9 million from 4 sources: Community Development Block Grant Funds, Home Investment Partnerships Program, Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, known as HOPWA, and the Emergency Solutions Grants, which is known as ESG. CDBG funding was basically flat from last year to this year. The home allocation is 1.5% greater than last year. The HOPWA allocation increased 5.1% from last year and is the primary source for our overall increase in HUD funding. And our ESG allocation declined 1.3% from last year. Just a note on our funding, these are all funds that were in the Consolidated Appropriations Act that was at the very start of this calendar year. So it fell under the previous administration. So Biden's current budget would be for our next year's funding. Prior to putting together our federal spending plan each year or action plan, a public meeting must be held to gather input on how best to spend our federal resources. This meeting was held on March 10th. Our next step is to issue a draft plan and hold a second virtual citywide public meeting to get feedback on the draft plan. This draft action plan will be released after the citywide budget proposal is released tomorrow, and the second virtual citywide hearing will be held on April 27th. You can go to the D&D website for information about that meeting. For the most part, our CDBG, home, HOPWA, and ESG funds will be used to continue very effective programs. About 64% of the HUD funds support 14 housing and homelessness programs, including the development of affordable housing, assistance to low and moderate income homebuyers and homeowners, rental support for persons living with HIV and AIDS, and support for renters at risk of displacement. CDBG funds also support our economic development, public service, and property management programs, including $2.7 million for the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development and about $4 million to the Office of Economic Development, which supports main streets, districts, and small businesses. For HOPWA, the city will receive $3.2 million in HOPWA funding. This 5.1% increase will be decided once, how that will be used, we decide once proposals from agencies are received and reviewed. And it's mostly for increasing funds for tenant-based rental assistance. For ESG, the city will receive $1.5 million for ESG. Approximately half of the funds go to homelessness prevention and the other half to street outreach. I will have Lila Bernstein speak briefly about our new COC funds or the changes for this year. Or were you expecting me to cover that as well?
I was, Tim, but I can pull it up.
That's fine. Okay. That's fine. Just a little confusion there. In addition to the sources detailed above, the city will receive $38,685,000 through HUD's Continuum of Care program. This funding represents an increase of $10 million over the amount awarded under the 2019 competition. The sizable increase is attributable to two factors. Over $2.5 million in youth-specific program resources were added to the COC program, and increases in fair market rents were awarded after 2 years without receiving these. The COC program is HUD's largest source of funding to support the city's homeless response system. These funds are generally awarded through a competitive notice of funding availability, and the city has competed successfully for these funds over the past several years, increasing our award 36% or $14 million since 2016. However, due to the ongoing pandemic, HUD bypassed the annual competition in 2020, opting instead to offer COC automatic renewals of existing grants. The renewal of this funding will allow existing nonprofits to provide ongoing housing and stabilization support to vulnerable populations impacted by homelessness and disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So now I will turn it over to Trinh Nguyen from Office of Workforce Development to speak briefly about their programs.
Thank you, and thank you, Tim. Thank you, Chair Edwards, Vice Chair Bach, and attending council members, residents, and community partners. For the record, my name is Trinh Nguyen, and I am the Director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. I want to thank Chief Sheila Dillon of D&D and all of their staff for the tremendous work in supporting workforce training and education for residents within CDBG. We are one of very few cities that are being supported by the Community Development Block Grants for workforce training and education. I also want to thank my staff at OWD for their hard work on managing these large, complex grants. As the city's workforce development agency, OWD manages a portion of CDBG funds on behalf of D&D, which receives CDBG funds for Boston from the federal government, as Tim stated. In the spring of 2019, we issued 2 open and competitive requests for proposals soliciting grants for programs to use CDBG funds to promote economic mobility for Boston residents. And the 2 RFPs received a total of 28 responses, requesting $3.9 million in funding. For 2020, OWD recommended 49 organizations for a total of $2,268,500 to provide critical employment, education, and economic services to over 4,000 low-income Boston residents with a range of services including job training and readiness, youth programming, ESOL, and benefit screening. Funding also included $400,000 for adult basic education programs. The funding for these programs allow us to fill in the gaps left by the state's adult basic education programs, and we prioritize these classes and seats that offer contextualized job-specific ESOL with pathways into employment for low-income Boston residents. To continue the city's commitment to equitable economic development, our grant-making principles this year were largely the same as the previous years, requiring partners to build programs leading to their employment, job training, or post-secondary education and economic security for residents. Building on this continuum of activities and services, funded programs also emphasize targeted industries with career pathways and family-sustaining jobs, and developing contextualized education and occupation, specific training and credentialing that further heightens the connection between CDBG and employment career pathways. We also supported programs that address underemployed incumbent workers to give them higher skills and higher career opportunities based on those skills. FY21 is the second year of our 2-year funding cycle, limited of programs funded in FY20 and refunding contingent upon the availability of federal funds, satisfactory program performance outcomes, and responsive refunding applications. And with this year's continued funding, a refunding application document was issued on March the 20th, and responses were due on May the 1st. Historically, the vast majority of funded programs have both performed well enough and submitted responsive refunding applications to the level funded for a second consecutive year. Rarely do we have programs choose not to reapply or fail to acceptability performs. Normally, each application is carefully reviewed, performance is evaluated, and other factors such as administrative responsiveness are taken into consideration. And due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this year's refunding process is anything but normal. And all programs have been impacted from completely shutting down to transitioning to some kind of distance learning, telework, or electronic service delivery. With welcome guidance from HUD, we're working with all programs to ensure they receive their funding, and no program will be penalized for failing to meet performance goals negotiated, and we're able to pay programs through the end of the fiscal year regardless of their status. Programs are also allowed to amend their contracts, provide certain services specific to mitigating the impact of the pandemic. I'm happy to answer questions you may have, and we also have awardees list and their training that was funded available upon request. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions, stay on and answer questions you may have. Thank you, and I'll pass it over to Tim.
Thank you, and I'm going to pass it right back over to the Office of Economic Development and Natalia Erdebe.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Natalia Erdebe, Director of Small Business in the Office of Economic Development. I'm mostly here to answer questions, but I do want to talk briefly about the programming dollars that we have through the HUD CDBG funding, as well as obviously talking just briefly about the team and how these funds help to support the team. So of the total amount that Tim mentioned previously. We offer about $2.4 million in direct programming assistance through 3 different programs. The first being the Boston Main Streets program, which supports 20 individual nonprofit organizations in Boston's residential neighborhood commercial districts. 16 of those are funded directly through CDBG funding. In addition, we have the Boston Restore and Design program, which is facade and signage improvements for retail storefronts in our LMI areas that are covered through the CDBG funding. Additionally, we offer technical assistance for small businesses, which is free technical assistance to the small businesses in partnership with over 20 different local providers in the city of Boston. These funds are essential to the ability of our office to conduct any support and programming for small businesses. It supports not only small businesses, but almost the whole team that's on the ground working directly to support small businesses in our neighborhood commercial districts. As we know, COVID-19 has devastated small businesses across the city, and the support has been dire during the pandemic and in our current recovery. CARES Act funding and direct collaboration with HUD during the beginning of the pandemic really helped us establish a strategy for support during those tough months, and will continue to be a huge resource as we move forward with our city's recovery. I'm happy to take any questions and elaborate on any pieces of what I just covered. Thanks.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councillor Sabi George. Go ahead, Tim.
That does complete our presentation, and we're available for any questions you might have. Thank you.
All right, councillors, I'm just going to go down the list of councillors in order of their arrival for questions that they may have. We'll start with Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I was looking at the rental assistance funds that are going out. Can you tell me, I didn't see Chinatown listed, and I know Chinatown is probably combined with downtown Boston. Can anyone give me some information on what's happening in Chinatown with rental assistance funds?
Katie, is that something you can follow up on? Or we
Sure. So yes, so Chinatown is included in the downtown Boston numbers. In addition, we have a very strong partnership and a contract with AACA, which, as you know, is based in Chinatown. And we've also awarded them a contract that includes what's called flexible financial assistance, so they can also serve that population. So in addition to receiving rental relief funds for that neighborhood, they also can process up to $2,500 grants per household to tenants in that neighborhood.
Okay.
But I can also get you the information on the exact zip codes in Chinatown of what funds have been distributed to Chinatown.
Okay, I just want to make sure that they're getting assistance just like every other neighborhood.
Yep.
And the other question I had is South Boston. I know is very, very low on the percentage at 0.79. I thought I read. South Boston's not a wealthy community. It's a community of people that are struggling to pay bills and barely making it. I'm looking at people going to the store and they're buying a can of Campbell's soup, and they're looking at the Campbell's soup for $1.58, and they're counting their change to see if they have enough money for a can of soup. I don't know where this impression is that we're wealthy over in South Boston. I don't know why the percentage is so low in South Boston.
So I think the percentage may be low in South Boston, and the numbers that are reflected there is because just recently we allowed mobile voucher holders to receive assistance from the city's rental relief fund because the funding was increased. So those numbers will increase for South Boston when we have the updated numbers that are released. And in addition to that, we've also partnered with Boston Housing Authority to help out Boston Housing Authority public housing tenants. And so you will see a lot of South Boston residents from that from the public housing residency receiving those funds.
So I thank you, Katie, for that answer. But I'm realizing that Councillor Finn, you're looking at the fact sheet on the COC program. So maybe Lila, you can speak to that because these are specifically for tenant-based rental assistance for those who've experienced homelessness. So this is not the rental relief program that's ongoing now. This is our kind of more historical programming around addressing homelessness. So those numbers, I'm now realizing those are the numbers that you're looking at, Councillor Flynn. So maybe, Lila, you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really a reflection of where people who have this particular type of voucher either are finding apartments to rent or that we have project-based rental assistance, essentially. So it's a reflection more of where those programs are located and where people have found apartments. It's not a reflection of, residents from particular neighborhoods. So there may be people who are now leased up in Roxbury, but originated from Hyde Park, or so it's really not about serving particular resident. This isn't the zip code of where someone became homeless. It's the zip code of where they now live. And we can dig in further as to why the rate is so low in South Boston.
Yeah, thank you, Lila. I just want to make sure my district receives equal share of the pot of funding as other districts do. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't advocate for my district. And South Boston has 0.79. I'm not able to really look at the numbers in Chinatown. So, I'm focused on my district. And I need to make sure my district is included in this.
Certainly. And what we'll follow up is to make sure you have the most recent data from the current rental relief funds, which is, the newer program. And we did provide data to the City Council earlier in March, but we can certainly provide an update of that with zip codes so that you can clearly see which ones are coming from Chinatown and from South Boston, et cetera. We can certainly do that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Point of clarification, just to make sure I'm clear, what Layla just mentioned is it's not so much what's being spent in each per person in each district. It's where if they happen to be housed after being homeless in South Boston, that's where the money goes. But
Correct.
For example, it could be that a lot of kids from South Boston happen to find housing in East Boston, and therefore the money kind of followed them there. But it's not that neighborhood specific. It's where they manage to find housing.
Correct.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you. Just want to make sure. Was that all, Councillor Flynn?
That's all. Was there other dockets that we were going to talk about later, or was this the entire group? Okay, I thought there was going to be some funding for veterans housing. Was that part of this?
That's not specifically part of this. However, CDBG funds used for affordable housing development can be used for veterans housing. We don't have a specific project that is allocated to it this time, but the CDBG funds can be used for that.
Okay, I would just like to make sure we do some outreach on veterans housing as well. That's an important issue in the city. I don't want us to drop the ball on not building any more or funding any more veteran housing. That's important to my district. It's important to the city, especially. It's important to veterans. So I just would like to ask D&D and the mayor's office to work with us on outreach on veterans housing. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for your support on that issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes. Good afternoon. Thank you for hosting. I love going after Flynn because he's been going in on all things that deal with our people. So thank you so much, Councilor Flynn, for fighting so hard, specifically for South Boston, because there is this illusion that South Boston is well off, but I do know that that's not the case. And so I really do appreciate your advocacy in that space. I do have some questions specifically around, I spoke with a constituent last night, a BHA constituent in particular, who is a college student, and talked about how difficult it is with the leasing scenario, right? Once you go off to college, this is more specifically to the BHA, but I'm curious, what can we do to help alleviate some of the financial burden that our college students who grew up in BHA, is there a way for us to utilize these funds to be able to, at the very least, their first year upon completing college, that they can still live with their parents for at least one more year without it impacting the financial income brackets? So I don't know, Tim, if this makes sense or if someone from BHA, but I'll just give you my own personal example. I grew up, my mom had a Section 8 voucher. Whenever, I would, if I worked or if there was any income, we would have to report it, and that would change the amount of rent we would have to pay. Obviously, those are state and federal guidelines. But I'm curious what opportunities exist for students who are low income, if there's a way that we can use some of these funds to subsidize at least our Boston Housing Authority students to be able to stay within the lease under housing a year after they graduate without it impacting the financial costs. I don't know if that all makes sense, but it was a question that came up. It's an issue that I think if we can tackle it through some of these grants that are available, even if we create a small pilot for a small subset of BHA residents who are coming back from college, they can stay within the lease without it impacting the financial income of the whole household. I know that's a lot and you may not be able to do it, but I'm wondering if you could utilize some of these fundings to do a little small pilot program to help support some of these students.
So just to kind of redirect and also kind of silo a little bit of this conversation, I don't know that anyone from BHA is on right now to discuss how they assess income or what ways in which they would reassess income depending on if a child goes to work for the entire family. So I don't believe we can speak to that assessment, that particular issue. In terms of the supports for folks who are currently receiving aid from period, who are on vouchers, I don't know. I think someone had mentioned possibly additional support to the city voucher program. If they wanted to discuss that, or if any of the funding is going to the city voucher program. But no, you would only specifically mention the increase in the FMR. Am I correct? Or excuse me, the fair market rents allowed under, right?
Right. We were getting additional funding to cover higher rents. The higher rents, yeah.
So on that, so because these are grant specific, Councilor Mejia, and a lot of the applications and standards of the grants are set not by BHA and not by City Council or not by the folks who are on today. I'm happy to follow up specifically with BHA, who comes under this committee, on specifically how we can make sure that their income guidelines don't push people or maintain them into poverty. But do you have a specific question on any of the funding stream?
Yeah, so I appreciate that redirecting. Sometimes I do need it, and I appreciate it. I am curious, though, let's just take BHA out of the conversation. Then how can we utilize some of these grants, if at all possible, to help support Boston low-income college students in their housing journey so that they don't end up homeless? How about that?
Perfect. What grants specifically support our young folks who are graduating in college and trying to stay housed, who don't live on campus, for example?
I'm kind of looking towards Lila to see if there's something around our youth homelessness work that might speak to this. I mean,
Yeah.
we definitely have work around people aging out of foster care. I mean, that's another big transition moment for folks who grew up in the city who might have problems.
That's right. So there is funding in this large grant that we're talking about that transferred from a separate HUD-funded grant called the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project that's now folded into the Continuum of Care grant. And so that funding is specifically to end homelessness among youth and young adults. It is primarily focused on youth and young adults who are already experiencing homelessness. But what I will say is that there are some city funds now that are going to young adults that are a little bit broader and are helping young adults kind of avoid homelessness if they're on the verge of that. And so we can send information to the council as a follow-up around how to access that program. One of the programs I'm referring to is called the Youth Flex Funds program. It's being administered by HomeStart, and it's pretty flexible to help young people avoid homelessness.
Wow. So thank you so very much for that, because sometimes you guys already resolve the problems and we don't know about them. The solutions to these amazing problems have already been resolved by you all. So it's good. So the next time somebody rolls up on me, I actually can say, go here, because we actually have a solution for that. I did not know that exists, and I'm just curious about how many dollars are allotted. Can you just talk to me a little bit about what that looks like and how do people go about applying for it?
Yeah, so I don't have the total amount in my head, so we can definitely get that to you. It isn't a huge program, so it's not like it sustains long-term vouchers for young people, but it is some startup costs for young people to get into housing. And we can get you the information about exactly how young people access it and who's eligible, and the total cost of the grant as well.
Thank you for that. And I think the last thing that I'll say to that point, and I do appreciate Councilor Edwards for always redirecting me, is that I think there is an opportunity for us to have a conversation with the BHA folks and your department, Tim, and your people, because there is a nice intersection in terms of how we support young people who are in public housing around this journey. So maybe the next round of waves of support grants, we can look at how do we look at the intersection of these two worlds. It's just something that we can think about in the future. Just whatever, I don't know if that.
Thank you, Councilor, for those thoughts. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. And before we go to Councilor Bach, I can't recall if there was a program. I thought we were working with specifically LGBTQ youth who we know disproportionately make up a large percentage of those who are homeless. And I didn't know if anyone could speak to that programming or outreach with some of the nonprofits and work that we've done before at DND.
Yes. So the one that comes to mind, and there may be more, but the one that I've heard of recently that got off the ground is being run by Bagley, and they're working on host homes for young people who identify as LGBTQ. And it's a model that is new to the city, but it's working to make sure young adults have a stable place to live with community members and have somewhere to be as they're gaining footing in education or employment or otherwise. But I can dig in further because there may be other funding streams that are supporting programs that have cultural competency or specific outreach to young people who identify as LGBTQ.
Thank you so much. Councilor Bach?
Thanks so much. And just a tail end on that, my understanding is that, and D&D folks can correct me if I'm wrong, that some of the youth homelessness money that was in the budget last year, including some of the reallocation, was targeted in particular at the fact that a lot of these federal funds require us to work with youth who are sort of meet that literal definition of homeless in like a kind of certified or in shelter, et cetera way. And my impression is that some of that city-specific money was allowing us to serve young people who are doubled up, because we know a lot of young people, and I think this is part of the population counselor Mejia's talking about, kind of bounce around and find themselves in these unstable housing situations, and yet they're not checked into shelter, so they can't formally qualify as homeless. Am I remembering that right, Layla?
That classification is correct. That the city funding is more flexible, and HUD does have a very specific definition about who is considered homeless and doubled up. HUD has many different ways they talk about it and think about it, but doubled up is typically not considered literally homeless under HUD's funding and HUD's guidelines. And the city funding that we received for young people is more flexible and is serving young people who are in these doubled up situations. So that's correct.
Right. And I think obviously, we'll hope to get some update on all of that work, because I think there's been quite a lot done in terms of getting RFPs out and everything. But I know that's not this money, but I think in the budget process, I assume we'll end up talking about that. I just wanted to check that I'm clear. So it seems like these are mainly continuity funds, except that there's another 10 million in the COC grant. Is that, like, big picture, zoom out, we're basically re-upping everybody? Yeah, okay, HOP was up 5%, but like functionally we're re-upping everybody except an extra 10?
Correct. This is functionally, this is exactly that. It's just re-upping everything from the previous year. It is continuing our funding of programs that are existing. And there, as I said in the initial remarks, the COC fundings is because of the inclusion of these youth funds and because of the rent increases. That's the big bump there.
So, okay, so even the 10, we're not really doing a lot of new granting for it, because it's so, and I'm sorry if I missed this, Tim, how much of the 10 is the youth funds that are getting bundled in? Lila or Tim?
Yeah, I have to look it up.
I think it's about four.
About 4, yeah.
It's about
Thank
4,
you, Rick.
but that may be the 2-year horizon, but it's 2.5, I think, is
two and a half.
for
Two and a half.
youth.
I just found it. It's 2.5. 2.5
and the rest is the FMR bump.
And sorry, are the COC, those vouchers, are they on FMR or on SAFMR?
They're on FMR.
Okay. So Councillor Flynn, is he still on, or did he have to go?
He's still here.
Oh, he's still on. Okay. So one thing, Councillor Flynn, I just wanted to dovetail on your point about Southie. So this was part of the whole reason that when I was at the BHA, that we moved BHA vouchers to small area fair market rents, is that the fair market rent standards, because they set the maximum payment standard at an average of the whole region in neighborhoods that have become particularly expensive to rent. And I think we know that a lot of the lower income folks in South Boston, if they're not in the housing projects, they're either in, long-term family type, like housing situations, or something else like informal. So if you actually go to rent in the market right now, it's quite pricey, and the FMRs are too low for people to use them. So I would expect that they're similarly not being used very effectively in most of the district neighborhoods I represent for the same reason. And I know that's why in BHA we moved over to SAFMRs to make sure that we were going to more fully access all city neighborhoods for housing opportunities. This is making me realize that I don't actually know, like, who administers these COC vouchers.
So they're granted out to nonprofits, and so Metro Housing is one of the major administrators of the COC rental assistance.
Okay, so they're FMR because Metro still hasn't made the change, because the state still hasn't made the change.
I'd have to see if, the regulations that govern COC would come not from the state, but from HUD. So I'd have to see whether HUD COC allows for small area FMR. So I would imagine that that's where the policy decision would lie, and not so much that the state would dictate that, because these are kind of HUD funds that flow to D&D and then we contract out to Metro.
Maybe, but I honestly think that's worth checking, because I would be surprised if you guys were sending, if the BHA was administering them, if HUD would require them to use FMR, because HUD made this overall policy decision that said, go ahead with SAFMRs. And
Yeah, no,
ironically,
I'm
from a
not
cost
sure.
perspective, our vouchers are so concentrated still that it doesn't actually end up net costing. So the point, I don't know, I would be surprised if HUD had an FMR only rule attached to this funding.
No, I'm not indicating that they necessarily have that rule, but I don't think that the state needs to weigh in on the policy just because Metro is administering. I do know that with COC rental assistance, there is an allowance that we can go up to 110 FMR for some of the portfolio. I think leasing, I may have the details wrong, but I believe when it's leasing dollars, it may cap out at 100% FMR. When it's rental assistance, I think it can go up to 110 when that's rent reasonable. But there may be an allowance for the system to convert to small area FMR in COC. I just don't know whether or not that's the case.
Yeah, it would be worth checking because I think, so when I say the state, the way the state's involved, so DHCD, right, is a recipient of federal vouchers, which are administered by Metro. And the whole issue was that when and for everybody watching at home, I realize I'm using acronym soup. Basically, the Boston Housing Authority made a shift that said, if you're trying to rent an apartment in a really expensive zip code, we'll pay a comparable rent there so that we can get folks into all the neighborhoods of Boston. The state agency, which administers vouchers via Metro Housing Boston, at that point made a decision to instead stay with this larger average, which basically effectively blocks voucher holders from a bunch of more expensive neighborhoods. And that was a policy controversy 2 years ago now in the spring of 2019. And I guess I wouldn't be shocked, Layla, if the fact that that's still Metro's payment standard with DHCD as the federal partner is governing them being FMR. So I only say that because it's super technical, but it's actually part of the reason why, to Councillor Flynn's point, like folks who are trying to help get out of homelessness are not able to use their vouchers in his neighborhood. So I just think it would be worth digging into.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, and I think we will ask that question. We'll confirm that.
But otherwise, okay, it sounds like, so there was a description in our fact sheet about the fact that, you guys were looking at doing an RFR and then an RFP for new funds, but I guess I don't quite understand how that intersects with the fact that there's really not a lot of new money. This is a pretty status quo set of grants.
I'm not sure exactly which part of the fact sheet you're referring to, but in many cases, we have to do a new request for proposals every year or two anyway. So even though it may be the same amount of money, that we do need to go back out, and it may end up being some changes in who our nonprofit partners are for that funding, et cetera.
Okay, so it's just saying that you're probably going to do a similar process you did in year 21. Okay, but the basic gist. But I guess my question then would be, obviously you haven't written that RFR or RFP yet, but is it fair to say that with this set of funds, you're not sort of anticipating a major change in direction in terms of what the agency is seeking to do with these funds?
No, we are not at this time. However, the process is still kind of underway. We're in the middle of our annual action plan process. We will be releasing a draft action plan in a couple of days after the city budget is released. And then there will be a 30-day comment period on that, and there will be a public hearing on April 27th. And so that will be another opportunity for people to express maybe new directions or new efforts that we should take in terms of those specific uses of some of those funds.
Okay, great. And then just really quickly to ask, is Trin
is still here.
Still here. So Trin, just similarly, I'm just trying to get a sense from you and then also from Natalia, like how much this is just stay the course versus new stuff.
Yeah, we thought about that, and we usually have a 2-year funding cycle for community development block grants, workforce development funds, mainly because it does take time to build the relationship with the residents and participants and also stabilize the nonprofits. So 2-year funding for grantees is not unusual for us. However, for this year, we wanted to do renewal level funding for our current grantees, mainly for predictability and to keep our grantees stable, considering the economy is still tough and we have this so-called third surge, and so third or fourth surge. So we thought it would be best to refund this one last time, which is the third year.
Got it. Okay, so we'll sort of move into new directions with the next round.
Correct. Assuming we know that with the vaccine out and there is some predictability on the labor market and for our nonprofit training partners for probably the end of this year. So our next cycle, we'll RFP it out. But for this third round, we thought we would level fund and stabilize the nonprofits. Tim, did you wanted to chime in?
Well, I just not to interrupt you, but to follow up on your statement, Natalia did just have to leave, but I can say that their funding is also pretty much stay the course, doing the same thing as previous years. However, within their funding, there's differences. For example, this year, given COVID-19, a lot of their technical assistance switched from kind of things focused on, restore or upgrades to property to helping owners, businesses actually access federal funds. So the technical assistance kind of programming, even though it may be kind of funded the same way each year, what kind of technical assistance they're providing has changed depending upon the conditions.
Got it. And the total amounts we're talking about is this, it's 2.6 over to OWD and 3.9 over to
I believe that's correct, yes.
To work economic development. And obviously we all know that we're talking in parallel, we're talking about these grants, there's also the department budgets, there's also this federal money that's coming. So for instance, in Natalia's shop, right, our conversations about what small business grants should look like and that kind of support is going to be a different thing.
Correct.
This is sort of a little more operational. Trin, I would just say and again, it's something we can talk about over the spring, but just in the context of, where are we when the dust settles? Certainly in my district, we're seeing this crazy shift on the commercial construction side to lab space. And I just feel like we aren't close to having the pipeline of Boston folks to do those jobs.
We are meeting with the BPDA senior staff and developers on the best use of some lab space for workforce training for residents. But I think I would defer to the BPDA project managers on that. And there's also alignment of hiring what kinds of jobs in the life sciences for that lab space and whether or not employers would have some kind of guaranteed pipeline for graduates from the training programs.
Yeah, well, I would love to be involved in all of that. I think we need a real shift. I think it should be you get these new lab spaces in Boston. It's hey, a perk is you get to hire from this pool of highly trained, well-compensated lab techs. I don't know, we just need to shift the dynamics there. But I recognize this is the housing hearing, so I won't dig in more on that. But I think, Madam Chair, those are all my questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. So again, I think just to summarize, this is level funding, slight increase or increases only to compensate for the FMR, increase in some youth work. This is, I don't know. I think Councilor Sabi George is no longer here, but for the most part, these are grants that have been part of our portfolio for years. So as the chair of housing, I'd like to just get these up for a vote. I'll see if we can tomorrow, if not, then the following week to get these grants released so you can continue your good work.
Thank you very much, Councilor.
Okay. Have a good one. Oh, I'm sorry. Before I go, there were 3 Of course. There are a couple things of data that I do know that Flynn asked for, and I
Yep.
just want to make sure that there's the rent relief. I know you already sent that. If you can repeat that, the COC updates, or by neighborhood maybe. I know he asked this in a previous hearing, but I'll just reiterate it. Do you remember the back and forth about the sober homes? And specifically, there seem to be undercounted. And then maybe it would be good to just get how many federal grants or federal money for veteran housing.
I'm sorry, for veteran housing?
Yes. Councilor Flynn. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. The sober housing piece is going to have to be sort of a project, because we have to figure out what we're missing. That's not something we have right offhand. That was a new data source for us, so that's going to be kind of a project to kind of bring that back around. Yes, but thank you.
And Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I just wanted to echo what Councilor Bach mentioned. I know, Trin, you're doing a great job, but in my district, I'm seeing a lot of lab space, biolab, life sciences, going back to the BPDA, trying to get a project change for life sciences, but I don't see the connection to residents with the necessary skills to get access to those jobs. I don't see the pipeline because it's such a new field. So I think the only people that can get these jobs are people from outside of the city, and that's not what I want to do. I want to get people from the Boston Public Schools or from these job training programs that can have access to these good paying jobs in our city, especially in life sciences. So I just wanted to echo what Council Block was saying. Again, Trent, you do an outstanding job there. And I just want to see if we can work with BPDA on job training programs for Boston residents in that particular field. Thank you.
Yes, I do want to just briefly state that we do have evidence-based programs and partners and community colleges that have disciplinaries in the life sciences and in the healthcare industry, not to elude that they're both the same. And there are graduates that get jobs in various pharmaceutical or life science employers, but they're not a lot of them. These employers tend to hire those who have bachelor's degree or graduate degrees, and not necessarily those who are unconventional. So we do have efforts from workforce development training programs. It's really linking it with developers and the development and Article 80 process to make that connection and to see if these employers from the life sciences and pharma companies will hire directly from these graduates. And we haven't been able to do that yet. So hopefully the BPDA will include that pipeline.
Thank you, Trent.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilor Braden. We're going to be ending the hearing shortly, but I did want to acknowledge that Councilor Braden has joined. And Councilor Braden, just in quick summary, this is actually continued funding that DND and Department of Workforce Development has received for many years, and we were just getting some slight updates on them. So with that, I look forward to getting this funding up for vote and distribution as soon as possible. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
I missed my turn then. Sorry. Did you call on me, Councilor Edwards, and I missed it?
I think she left.
Oh, dang. Well, I'll just, you know how I do. Don't worry. I'll figure it out a way to get these messages. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Councilor Edwards.
Councilor Flynn, I just want to let you know, I just looked at the applications for rent relief. We've only had 94 people out of 4,000 from South Boston apply.
Okay.
And then I'll get the Chinatown zip codes and send you the information on that. Okay.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie. And I know there's always been trouble with the zip code in Chinatown. I always want to try to get the information as it relates to the Chinese community in Chinatown, but it's also included the areas around it that have different demographics than.
Right. Yeah, that's why we have that contract with AACA, because we want to make sure that that community is being served.
Yeah, and that's an important issue with public health as well, obviously. So I'm trying to get that, public health. I need to have that information about Asian health, and then everyone else's health also. But if you mix in the Asian community in with the residents of the Ritz-Carlton, it doesn't give me a good read on the immigrant community in Chinatown. So
sure. So I'll get that information to you as soon as I have it.
All right. Thank you very much.
No problem. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Trent. Thank you, Katie.